Now let's start our email link authentication. This one goes in two parts. You first need to send the email with a link, and then when the user clicks on the link, we need to verify if the link is valid and grab the user information from that. So in our auth service, I'm going to create two functions here. One is to send the email, so send email link, and the other one will be to verify email link. Now let's take a look at the documentation. There's a very important part of this send the email link that we need to add. If you go to the Firebase documentation under guides, web, email link authentication. So if you scroll down here, you can see that we need to send an email, and we also need to send an object with some settings, and this will tell Firebase how to create that URL, the link itself. So we first need to send a URL, and that will be the page where you want Firebase to send the user to after he clicks on the link. And then there is this handle code in-app, and this is really good because, for example, if you're making a PWA and the user gets the email on their mail app, they get out of the browser, go to the mail app, and then they click in there. And if you have a PWA installed, that link will open the PWA and not the browser window, which is really nice. Now this other two in here, it doesn't matter for us, but this is in case you are building like a iOS or Android app. And then, so let's go. We need to send the email and action code settings, which is this one here. So I'm just going to copy this variable over here. Now back to in our code, I'm going to just paste in here. First, I'm going to remove these comments and then these ones as well, because we don't need it right now. So just the handle code in app and the URL. And here I'm going to do const because this is a constant. So we're going to receive the email from the component. And then if there is an email, we can do something about it. We can send to Firebase to create the link and send to the user. So here we can call the Angular Fire auth, then auth, and then send signing link to email. And here we take the email and the action code settings. There you go. So basically it's just this, but then we will need to do some other stuff. So let's make it an async call so we can wait for this to happen. Now if you're new to async, this would be the same as if you would put .then and then do something else here with like that. This would be exactly the same as that, but then you can use the async method and make it a little bit little nicer to read. Now after the email is created and sent to the user, we need to set that email to the local storage. We can do that with set item, and then you just create a name here like email for signing, and then you pass the email. And this is gonna be necessary because whenever the user come back to our page, we need to know the email that they're going to use. So we save it inside our local storage, and then whenever the user is back, we can compare the email with the link. Now for this URL over here, this is the URL you're gonna send the user back to your page. Now, right now we are in our local host, so you could do HTTP localhost and then the port 4200, yeah, the Angular port. But then this is not gonna be scalable. You're gonna send it to Firebase host, and then over there is gonna be a different link. Now let's create a variable in our environments in here, and we can add this URL. So I'm just gonna copy here, go to the environments, and here in the environment.ts, I'm gonna create a new entry. You can name however you like. I'm gonna call base URL. and it's gonna target the local host over here. Now, why I'm doing this? Simple. You can put it in here, base URL, localhost when you're in development, and then go to production. And add your domain over there. Now we can just call it in the auth service with the environment. We first need to import it. So we need to import environment from, so let's see, one more up, environments, and then environment. And now we can call the URL, the base URL we created. I'm going to create a private constant here so we can hold that information. Environment dot base URL. Now we can use it down here. This dot base URL. So whenever you use the deploy to production we created before, is going to use this URL, and when you just deploy to production in dev, it will use the local host. Okay, now back to our application. Let's add a form so we can grab this email from the user. So in our page, now here I'm gonna remove this and I'm gonna add to our home page because I don't really need that here. And now I can just remove everything from here and add that one. Now here, instead of calling the logout, I'm just gonna send them to the auth page, just like that. And here we can just add login. Now we need to import the constructor. We need to import the authentication service, so public, because you're using outside auth service. There we go. Now the error is gone. Okay, now let's go back to our authentication page and we can start creating a form. Before we start with the template, let's go to the page.ts. And here we need to import forms and validators from Angular Forms. I'm going to create a variable to hold the email, and here will be a form control, and form control belongs to the Angular Forms, and that helps us to see if the form is valid, and we can add validators to it. You can do check-ins on the input itself. Like for example, here we can ask if say that is required, and validators validate if it's an email, for example. But we're gonna go in more depth. Right now we only use one field, so there's not much we can do about it. It's just a simple form. But later we're gonna see better how this Angular Forms works. Now it comes in two parts, the Angular form. This one, it's the Reactive Forms from Angular, and to use that we need to import it, otherwise you're gonna get an error. To import, you just need to go to the auth module. Here we have Forms module. We need to import Reactive Forms module, and we need to add it down here to the imports as well. So this will give us access to this form control. Right, now that you have the email variable over there, we can use it and send the email link. First, create a public function, and it's also going to be async because you need to wait for some stuff to happen. So send email link, and let's do it inside the try catch, so we can console log any error if it happens. Now here we need to await for this for that function we created in our auth service here. We need to wait for this to happen, and then we can do something like reset form, tell the user that we send an email, and so on. So auth-service.send email link, and here we only need this .email .value. Now why using value? Because email is going to be the form itself, so we need the email value in there. You could name this email form, but for simplicity's sake I'm just gonna call it email here. Now after this is done, we can just do like, we can empty the input field. For example, we can do with reset. As you can see, there are plenty of other options in here. Like if you do the dot, you can see that if for example it's touched or untouched, this would be like if the user started to type something, if it's valid, if it's an email or not, or would be invalid if it's empty, because we said here at the top that is required. So it's really nice to have something like the Angular Forms in our toolset, because it does give us a lot of options. But we're gonna go and see more about it later. Now let's just console log something here. I'm gonna send you an email with the login link. Alright, so that's done. Now let's create our form input. So here we're gonna do ion grid, ion row, and ion column. So we can leverage Ionic's responsive grid. So the first thing, I'm gonna add an ion item, which you have the ion input. So ion input. Now we can do an ion button as well. So the button is to send link. Then we can call that function. So click. We send email link. Now for the input, we have a type of email. And then the form control, and you need to add it in the brackets, and that's the syntax for it. And then you can do the email, which is the one we created here on the page. Yeah? So we are referencing this form control over here. You could either add an ion label, but I'm just going to do a placeholder here. And that will be email. It's also required. Now let's run the server. My server is running, so I'm gonna open up so we can see. There we go. We have the email and the button. I'm gonna use some properties so we can add this button would be stretched across the application. So button, you can use expand. And then there is block. This you can check on the Ionic's ion button documentation. There are plenty of information in there. I'm just gonna go through it fast, but you can add fill as well, which you can be like outline, block, full, clear. You can also control click or alt click, and it will take you to the components typings. And here you can see the fill. You have clear, outline, solid, and default. The expand is full or block. And here there is a little explanation. What is it about? So if you don't want to go to the documentation website, just Control or Alt click, depending on what platform you are. And then you can visit that link, that property, and see what it does. Same for the button. You can click on the button and then it's going to show what it does, what properties you have on it as well. So, but that's if you're using VS Code. Now here we have our main grid. I'm gonna add another smaller grid over here because I want two buttons here for the Twitter and the Google. So I'm gonna do another row and a call. So one call is gonna be for the Google button and the other one for the Twitter. And this is how it works. This row, because they are only one at this level, it will stretch all the way. Now, if you add one row and 2 columns, you're going to have 2 columns on that row. Now, here it's going to be, as I mentioned, it's going to be Google. And the other one, Twitter. Something like this, if you are doing more. But this is how you can put like 2 buttons, one side by side. And I'm also passing it as a small size with a few outline and block. So let's take a look now. There you go. We have one full block and then 2 side by side. We can add some margin here as well. So if you take a look at the documentation, the Ionic documentation, and here under guides, there is this CSS Utilities, which is a bunch of CSS that you can just add the class to your component, and you don't need to write any CSS. So as you can see here, there are the class to center text. And if you scroll down, there are plenty more. You can turn strings to uppercase and things like this. Now, but I'm looking for some margins, to give some margins to it. Here you can also hide stuff, these new ones here. So you can add padding, and this you add padding all around it. And I just want this one, Ion padding top. So it's gonna, here on the between the input field and the bottom is going to have some space. So Ion button, it's gonna add here the class. Now if I take a look, it should, but this is padding. I wanted margin. There you go. Now it has some space in there. And yes, you have a padding and there's margin here at the bottom as well. So that's what I was looking for. And by default, they apply 16 pixels. And you can also change this with the setting Ion margin inside your class, the globals in here, or the environments in here, Ion, if you want to change that default. Okay, now it looks all right. Let's just make it in the center again. It's gonna go to my CSS page and I'm gonna paste in here, Ion grid, make it 100 so we can stretch it out in the row 100, or you can do less if you want a little bit over. And this is to center the text as well, like we did on the other components. But for that we need to add something here like login. There you go. And this would center it up there. Now I'm just gonna push it up a little bit in here. Let's call it 70%. There you go. If you want to change the colors of a text in Ionic, you can do so by just simply adding an Ion text, just like that. And then you add your text, and then you can use the color attribute that comes with Ionic. So add any color and it would change the, there you go, just like that. I'm gonna do secondary there. So all right, let's test it. We can send the email now, but before, let's console log the status of this form, because Angular Forms comes with validation, as I mentioned, and we can do that by just console log the status of it. So this dot email dot status. So console log. This dot status dot email, and then we can see. Now here we need to do a check if there is a valid email in it. So email dot valid. We can do this. Otherwise we just do nothing. Because if you don't do this, it's going to keep telling them this message every time they click on the button, even though there's nothing happening there. So if you click in here, let's do an else over here, console log no email. So if you click in there, it loads, no email. Now we can check properly if there is an email valid over there. Now to test, we can do send the email, and then if you just add something, it's an invalid email, and we're getting this auth invalid email because it's sending to the Firebase, and this is the error code that is sending back to us. Now we can continue for the .dev, and as you can see here underneath, it's changing the color because Angular has this form state, and because we said that we want to check if this is a valid email. Right now it's not valid, but as soon as you add the and something else, is going to be a valid. So it's actually changing the color of the form here underneath. So if you send, we get an invalid in here, but the email got sent. So now we need to look, and it got invalid because we are resetting and then we are considering log. So if you do like this, it's going to send. So let's try again. And then you click send, is a valid, and then we're also running the no email, but we got the email here. So if you check on your email, here we have the email that got sent to us. And then if you click on the sign in, it should take you to the application, but we need to apply the verification before we can do anything else. Now if you go back in here and you go to local storage, you can see that you have this email for signing, which we created in our function. So this function works. We can send the link we got in there, and then we have the link that is sending us back. And as you can see, there's an API key, and then there is a code over here as well, and mode. Now this is the link that was created, and we need to now get this URL from here and verify if you can authenticate the user. So let's go back to our application. Just before that, I want to show you how you can customize these colors over here. And you do that inside your, here under globals, you can just set some variables. And because this is a border for the Ion item, and you can find the information there on the Ionic framework components, Ion item down here. So if you scroll all the way down, as I mentioned before, there's some CSS properties there. And here you have the background, border color, and this is what's being applied to it. And here's the one that we need: highlight color, focus, invalid, and valid. And this is what is getting this color. Angular is telling the component that is invalid, and then just changing the color for us, which is really nice. Now you might be thinking like, why is it on the input, and why is it on the item and on the input? And I had the same question. It's just implementation, but it looks nice nonetheless. So let's add that. We can just change these variables in here inside the component. But just before I do that, I'm gonna add in here a color to this item so we can see it better, because right now it's not matching the component on the background, so we don't see it properly. So in the code of page, just here the item, I'm gonna add a color light. Now we can see better in there. I'm gonna add it medium so we can see better. This is just for you to see what I'm doing. If you type tab, it's gonna be selecting the items around your page. So here, if you tab, it's going to change this color here as well because it's being focused. Now let's start to change this default. So we have a focus background here that we need to change the color so it doesn't look that white because the text is not so nice. So in our global variables, we can add the item. Now these are the three colors from there, from the Ion item here: valid, focus, and invalid. So the valid before was green, so I'm gonna add it as a primary now so we can see the difference. Because by default it's the success color. So now it's going like this. If you want to change in there so you can see better, let me change this back to light. And here I'm going to put purple. There you go, it's getting purple color. So that's the valid, and then the other ones are the same. So if it's gonna be invalid, it's gonna be warning, danger. Then we can change the colors. Now I need to change the background in there with the tab, this tab button. You can use the background focused. And this I didn't find in the documentation. I used the DevTools to look into the component itself and find it. And let's change also the color, which is the text. Now if you save it, next time you load it and use tab, as you can see, we're changing the color in there, and then you can use this one for anything you want. So this is how you can customize your form inputs. Yeah. Okay, now let's go back, and we're going to verify that URL. Now the first thing is that we're sending the user here on the base URL. This is where you're sending back the user. And in the environment, as you can see, we only add the root of our application. So it's gonna be added in there. And here is here's the email. And then it's redirecting to the home page because we have the redirect. So let's remove this redirect and just leave it as in the root. And then we can play around with it. So in our main routing component, here we have this redirect that is taken to home. So I'm just going to remove it. And for the home component here, I'm just going to leave it empty. So whenever it's the root of application, we load this page. Same as the way we're doing, but without the home in front. Now, there we go. It's loading our page. And I have these buttons over here. Right, next thing to do is to verify that email. So we're gonna add we have this verify link in here. We need to grab the URL from the component, and then we're gonna send it to the SDK, Firebase SDK, to verify for us. But just before that, we need to change here on the app component.ts. We need to change the URL here because otherwise it's gonna be broken, our menu. All right, let's go back and continue. On the service, verify email. And this is also gonna be async because we need to do a bunch of stuff. And we need to grab the URL from the component. So that's gonna be the string. So we need to check with the Angular Fire Authentication if the auth is signing with email link, and then you pass the URL. Now, if this is true, we will do something, otherwise nothing. So we put that check inside the if statement. So here we first need to grab the email that we saved in the local storage when we send the email. So email local storage dot get item, and then this is the variable we used up here. So now if the email is not there, in case the user empty out his cache, clean up his browser history and stuff, or he's using another device, we need to ask for an email from them so we can try to match them. So let's use the window prompt and just ask them to confirm the email. Now, in case there is an email in there, we can just send the email that we found on the local storage and the URL data for the Firebase SDK. So we can do that with the Angular Fire auth. So sign in with email link, and then you pass the email and the URL. Now, after this, it's gonna be done. So you can also do something else with this result. For example, let's wait for this to happen. We wait for this to check and to see if the authentication is valid, and then you can use this result in here, and the result will be the Firebase user object. So let's console log result, and also if this is successful, we need to remove that local storage email from there, because it's not nice to keep the user data like that. So we remove item, and then we can remove that thing again, the email here. There we go. Now our function is done. Let's call it in our home page, which is where we're gonna send the user back to it. The first thing you need to do is to go to the page.ts. We need to import router and the auth service we already have in there, also router. And here we need to implement it inside our constructor. Let's create a function here that is going to verify the login. So I'm going to make it async again, and I'm going to call it verify login. As usual, try catch, so we can grab any error. And now we can just await for the verification. So verify email link, and for that we need to use the router and then URL. The Angular router will give us the current URL, so we can access that by that. Now let's take the result and add in a variable over here. Like this, you can just do, if there is a result, like a user, for example, we can do something. Now, the reason we're getting this result error over here is because we're not returning anything from our function. As you can see here, we just grab that result, but we're not doing anything here, console log. So let's return result.user.email. Something like this. Now the error should be gone. There we go. So if there is a result in there, we can console log that. Let's do console log in here. Result. Let's just do the full user. And also, as you can see over here, there is a credentials operation. There is the user, which is the Firebase user, and there is also additional user info. So let's just send back the result and here we're gonna console log. All right, now this function, it's here, but we need to initialize it. And for that, we're gonna use Angular Lifecycle called ng on init. So ng on init. And this will happen when the component is about to load. And for that, we need to implement on init. There you go. And got imported in here at the top as well. Don't forget. Now we can just do this dot verify email. Verify login. And before the data from the homepage.html displays, this component, the ng on init, will load whatever is inside. So we're gonna verify and then we're gonna show the data. So my server is running. I'm gonna go there and I'm gonna check it out. This email probably no longer works. So if I try to get there, here on the DevTools, I have the action code in here. And as you can see, the code is invalid code. And because probably it's expired, it's been some time since we sent, I'm gonna send it again. So there you go, valid, sent. It's fast. When I click to it, I go back to our page, and now I have the result over here, which is the user. And this is exactly what you can find here on the IndexedDB. Just this one here. But it has a bunch more stuff in here regarding the user, the application as well. But what are we interested on? It's also here on the additional info. We have this is new user true, and what type of provider we use as well. So you could use this new user true to do some stuff like database stuff for the new user. Like for example, if you go back to our page, to our auth service, here if you do like if result dot additional user info dot is new. So here, in case the user is new, you could do something like show tutorial, for example, about your application. Now, before we finish this lesson, let's do one more thing, because we need to, after we get the login, I'm gonna send again. So I get the email and I get redirect to my page over here. And of course, my name is not there because I don't have a name on my object here. So display name is null because I sign up with email. And I still have this data over here. So our login was successful, but we need to remove that information from here. And you can get that information just by using the history API. So let's just see how we can do that. Back in our code, just here at the top, I'm going to leave this one in here so you can have it as a reference, that you can do something like this as well. Now, if there is going to be history there, and history.replace state, we can change the information that is in there. The first thing we need to do is to grab the whole URL, and then we get the previous state, and then we give a new state. So we just grab this whole URL, and then we can use this interrogation mark to split, and then only display this after. And I'll show you what I mean by just, let's console log the URL, and we can split on that interrogation. Now first we're going to console log this, and we're going to see, and you can see what is it that we are doing. So we're going to do history.replace, and this one takes an object. Take the data if you want to send a title, whatever that is in there, or if you want to change, but what you want is the URL. So the data, you can leave an empty object. I don't want to change anything there. And then the title can be the document title. It's the same one that was there, but here's what you need to send. We need to send the URL. We need to split it, and we're gonna split on the interrogation. And because this split always returns an array, we're gonna get two parts: whatever is before the interrogation and whatever is after. So we're gonna have an array of 2. So as you know, array in JavaScript starts with 0. So we're gonna get the first part of the array. Now to test, let's do it again. Valid send. Got the email here. And if you look in here, it's gonna disappear the URL, just like that. Now this is the array that we receive. First array was the slash and everything else. And we also got our authentication done. So we successfully created a verification. The user is we are being able to authenticate the user, and we also apply some security here by removing any API key and user information from the URL. And also this checking here you can do if you want to add some kind of flow to your application.